Hi, my name is Francesca Watson. I'm a metalsmith coming to you from my working and teaching studio, The Makery, in the Texas Hill Country outside San Antonio. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Project X silver metal clays and how we might use those as a stand-in for casting. Now, I'm a huge fan of texture and pattern. I do an awful lot of roll printing, but I was interested in exploring ways to get deeper texture, something more along the lines of a cast object, finer detail in my work without having to break out the casting equipment. I don't do a lot of that either. So I've made a video for you showing you my experiments with Project X clay. You're going to see it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And at the end, I'll come back and share my final thoughts with you. Let's take a look. When you first open the package, it may seem that the clay is extra hard, and it is, but that doesn't mean it's dried out. It's a combination of the binder and the vacuum sealing they use for the packaging that makes it feel that way. Slice open the inner pouch and then use that to protect the clay as you roll it out as thin as possible. What we're doing here is waking up that binder. Get it as thin as you can and then fold it over and do it again. The more times you do this, the more malleable the clay will become. Keeping it inside that inner sleeve will help prevent the clay from drying out or getting all over your hands and tools. Now, I made the mistake of using a couple of drops of a hydration product early in this process, and it really wasn't necessary. But that's why the clay may seem a little smeary in a couple of these shots. I got too impatient. Be patient. Roll it out very thin, and you can see what you wind up with is a beautiful, soft, malleable, workable clay. Then all you have to do is compress it into a ball and place it under a plastic cup or cover with a few sprays of water to keep it hydrated while it rests. It needs about 5 minutes. For my project, I've elected to use a laser cut paper pattern for one side of my textured element. I'm using a brush to work Liberation Spray release agent into all the nooks and crannies of the pattern. I really want to saturate this paper, and I'll know it's working when I can see the Liberation Spray seeping through on the back side. Near the end, I'm turning this over and adding some Liberation Spray directly to the back of the paper just to make sure I've got it all covered. I'm not really worried about those edges. I'm mostly concerned with the center of the pattern, which is where I'll be rolling my clay. Now I have to prepare my Lincora texture mats. These are beautiful, deep textures. And again, I'm going to use Liberation Spray, a small amount on my hand, which I'll pick up with a brush and work into that deep texture. I don't want to get sloppy here. I shouldn't see any puddles when I'm done. But I do want to work a nice thin film of that release agent into that deep texture. The whole thing should have a faint sheen when I'm done. Now I'm ready to start patterning my clay. I break off about half the ball, and I notice I have a problem, these fine micro cracks. Again, this is not because the clay is drying out. It may be because the hydration agent that I used very early in the process is breaking down the binder, but it's an easy fix. I'm going to just smear it into very thin sections between my fingers, just like I did when I was rolling it out. It doesn't take much before the clay is fully malleable again. I start by making a small flat pad out of the clay I'm working with, and I lay it over the portion of the pattern I want to capture. A second Lincora mat helps to make sure my work surface is level all the way across. I'm using a combination of slats to get to a 10 card thickness. A little bit of extra Liberation Spray on my roller will make sure that the clay doesn't stick to it. Then I carefully roll out the clay to 10 cards thick. I remove the blue slats which gives me a new thickness of 6 cards. This will allow me to impress this back side of the clay with this paper texture. A little bit more liberation spray just for insurance before I roll that texture onto the back of my piece. Very carefully, working first towards me and then away. No back and forth before I carefully peel the clay off the texture mat. Look at that beautiful deep texture. Now I'm going to use a template and a fine-tipped awl to create the arc at the top of the texture piece I'm going to use for my earrings. I just run the awl along the inside edge of that circle to create a perfect arc. Then I use the awl to finish cutting out the shape. A fresh scalpel allows me to make some further refinements to the shape without stretching or pulling the texture. Once the clay is completely dry, I'm using a sanding sponge in a very fine grit to refine that edge. Think of this as the equivalent of filing your metal. The clay is in a greenware state, so I'm using a very light touch, trying not to put any pressure on it to crack it or bend it. I'm working back and forth along that edge as well as up and down. And the idea is to get that metal edge as smooth as possible before I fire it to avoid cleanup later. Periodically, you should use a soft brush to get any dust off the piece as you work. Those small particles can wind up fusing to the surface and affecting your finish. If necessary, you can use your fine-tipped awl to get particulate out of the deeper texture recesses. Remember that any cleanup you don't do now is cleanup you'll have to do after the piece is fired. Now we're ready to fire the piece. Or are we? It turns out that the flex clay requires one additional step before it can be torch fired. Once the clay is completely dry, it needs to spend 30 minutes on a hot plate at 300 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're kiln firing, you can build that into your firing schedule. Otherwise, this can happen. What a bummer. I placed the pieces on a metal grate over a hot plate that reached a temperature of 300 degrees Fahrenheit, and I let it sit for about 30 minutes. Then I was ready to try again. I'm using a clean solderite board and a butane torch. This oily substance that's coming to the surface of the clay is specific to the flex formulation. You won't see this if you're using regular Project X clay. Once that's burned off, you'll see flames appear as the clay enters its burnout phase. This just means that the binder, which is holding the metal molecules together, is burning off, leaving only the metal behind. Once the burnout phase is complete, we need to get the clay up to temperature so the metal molecules can complete their sintering process. You can see the clay changing color and appearance. It begins to curl up a little bit, and it takes on a peachy glow. We want to see that glow throughout the next part of the process. Be patient, because we're not quite there yet. As we continue to heat the material, you'll see that it begins to curve and curl up. This is where most of the shrinkage is happening. And once the piece flattens back out, we'll know that that part of the process is done. There. As the piece flattens out, we're going to set our timer. We need to hold it at this color for a full 2 minutes. It's really important that for the entire 2-minute period, the entire piece is evenly heated. You don't want any hot spots or any cool spots, and this is probably going to take a little practice. Once the timer goes off, you can let the piece cool and then quench it. A little bit of scrubbing with a brass brush and a bit of soap, and you have a beautiful, deeply textured, fine silver metal piece ready for your project. Here's a different element going through the torch firing process from start to finish without the boo-boo at the beginning. This is the entire firing process from start to finish at 3 times speed. Holding the fired piece next to an unfired piece, you can really see how much it shrinks. Next, I'm constructing a simple loop out of 2 by 1 millimeter rectangle sterling wire. The element I've created out of metal clay will be soldered to this wire element. Don't blow your solder piece off your charcoal block like I did. There are a couple of different ways to approach this particular soldering operation. Here, I'm doing what's called pick soldering, using my pick to drop a small piece of solder onto the seam before flowing that solder with my torch flame. Alternatively, I can lay a small piece of solder on my charcoal block and lay the seam on top of it. This is a great approach for people whose hands may be a little shaky. With the wire elements cleaned up and ready to go, I just need to test the metal clay elements against the curve to make sure we've got a good fit. Then I clean the metal clay element just like I would any other metal element, using a sanding drum to make sure that the connection point is clean and smooth. Once I know I have a good fit on all the elements, I'm ready to go. Perhaps my favorite part of working with this product is how little preparation it requires for soldering. Here, I've cleaned up both the wire pieces and the metal clay piece to make sure the connection points are clean. I've made sure I have a good fit, and then I flux and put in a very small amount of solder. I'm not using any more solder here than I would use with a metal piece constructed out of sheet or wire. 3 small pieces is going to be all it takes. Once everything is lined up and I know the solder is in place, I'm ready to go. As with any solder operation, I'm concentrating the heat on the piece that has the highest mass, which is the metal clay piece at the bottom. When the solder flows, it's a thing of beauty. With ear wires added and a little patina, I drop the completed pieces into a pin finisher for a quick tumble. Then I use a simple nail buff to brush the patina back. The green side removes the patina, while the white side creates a high shine. This is my favorite way of removing patina, especially on highly textured pieces like this. And as you can see, it does not take much for this metal clay to take on a high shine. I'm doing this all by hand. The resulting pieces feature deep, detailed texture and are equally happy with a high shine or a matte finish. So there you have it. I have to say, overall, I was really impressed with this experiment. This is the flex product of the Project X clay, so it did require a little bit of extra special handling in the firing process, as you saw. I think I'd like to do some experimentation with the non-flex version and see how that compares. But overall, this was a great outcome. Beautiful, fine detail, took a polish beautifully, didn't require any special handling to solder my elements together. It has been my experience with other metal clays that you have to do a lot of burnishing and it sucks up a lot of solder and it's kind of a thing. This was not that at all. It took patina beautifully, and as I said, took a lovely high polish. This is something I could see using in my designs going forward. Thank you so much for joining me for this video today. If you have any questions, if you'd like more information about the Project X product, please do reach out to our friends at Clay Revolution, www.clayrevolution.com. And look for more videos from us on our website, www.makeryarts.com. Thanks for joining us today. I hope to see you again soon.